Hello again. Welcome to the third episode of Military English Made Easy, in which we are trying to have at least a pleasant monologue from me to whoever else is on the other side regarding, of course, topics of level 1 to 4 in military English. And apart from that, generally focusing on different subjects that we hear about in the news or in the medias. Before we go to what was promised last week, so the comparison between level 1 and level 2, I'd like to start off with the first topic regarding generally world news as such. And because I lived abroad in Scotland for a couple of years, some time back, I would like to focus on the topic of Scottish independence. Scottish independence that can have a big impact on Brexit as it's happening now. But let's start from the beginning. As you might or may not remember, in 2014, Scotland staged a referendum regarding whether to leave or stay within the UK. The outcome of the referendum was to, of course, stay within the UK. The amount of people who attended the vote was above 85%, which showed London that Scotland is taking this referendum very seriously. The difference between whether to stay or leave was marginal as well. 55.3% voted to stay and 44.7% voted to leave. This shows that within the 85% of those eligible to vote, almost 45% voted to go out. Of course, there were clashes between, let's call them loyalists, and the ones opting for a move out. Mostly due to the fact that Scotland for quite some time has been led in the Scottish Parliament, also established not so long ago. They've been led by the Scottish National Party, which will be always voting for independence. Why is the topic of independence so important to the Scottish people? Well, at least to that 44.7% of them. Mostly because Scottish people are a proud nation as such. They have been under English rule for a long time. They have a long history of clashing, them and England, dating all the way back from medieval times, from the so-called William Wallace and Robert the Bruce period, later on up to the mid-18th century and Bonnie Prince Charlie, the Battle of Culloden, which was literally the last large and important battle fought on English soil, which ended any kind of independence movement up north. But since Scotland has not been only a background to the UK politics from that period, of course, you have to mention things like the Highland clearances, the English taking the Stone of Destiny to London for some time. You have to mention the burning of the Book of Kilts with the kilt patterns. the Scottish people weren't allowed to do a lot of things that were typically Scottish after 1748. So they were, in a way, they were repressed for what happened, for the independence movement of the Jacobites under Bonnie Prince Charlie. So that more or less took about 100 years or so, in my opinion at least. So after the Scottish Parliament was reintroduced by Queen Elizabeth II, and for example such parties as the SNP started to get more and more votes, it was clear from the very beginning that sooner or later an independence referendum will be held. What is interesting, of course, that London allowed, so they made it legal as such, that the referendum could happen. The other thing is that, of course, London also said that whatever the outcome of the referendum, it will be legal. So that's why a lot of people showed up for the referendum. And a lot of people understood what they are voting for, in opposition to what happened in the UK a couple of years later when there was the Brexit referendum. But we will talk about it in the next episode. So, going back to the Scottish independence. So the people voted against, at least the 55.3%. Did this in a way inflict the ways or the doings of the Scottish National Party? No. At the moment they are still pushing for a second referendum. The difference is that now London and Boris Johnson mentioned that the referendum that happened in 2014 was a one in a generation opportunity that the Scottish had, and they didn't take it. In a way, that means that the next referendum legally can be allowed in about 20, maybe 30 years. Nicola Sturgeon, who is the leading voice now in terms of referendum in Scotland, says that Scotland is preparing for a referendum in 2021. If London won't allow it, they will have the same situation as in Catalonia. So they will make the referendum, but it won't be legal. Will there be a second outcome like in Catalonia? Possibly not. I don't think there will be tens of thousands of Scottish people going out on the streets clashing with the British police or British army, if the situation goes out of hand, of course. I don't think Nicola Sturgeon will go into exile as Puigdemont did from Catalonia to Belgium, as you might remember. So it's going to be a strange year for England, for Scotland and for the UK as such, because we have the pandemic, they have the Brexit transition period, of which I will talk about in the next episode, and Scotland trying to get a second referendum. It's interesting to think what the Scottish exit from the UK will mean to England or to the UK itself. First of all, around Scotland, around the whole area of Scotland, in terms of course, the North Sea, they have a lot of oil rigs that pump up most of the oil used by BP. So it's going to be interesting to find out that Scotland, for example, after going out, will say, listen, now England has to pay us for using the, or taking out the oil from the bottom of the sea. Can this happen? Possibly, but we don't know at the moment. Second thing, interesting for me in my personal, investigation into the topic, what will happen with the British Army? Mostly because some of the Scottish units, or called at least, have a name of Scotland in them somewhere, like the Scottish Guards, or the Scottish light infantry, or Scottish battalions, or whatever else there is. Will they go back up north, since it will be an independent country, or they will be transformed into different ones and stay within the UK? And then, therefore, Scotland will have to form a new kind of army to defend its independence. What will happen with UK within NATO if Scotland leaves? Will Scotland be allowed to join NATO and European Union easily without any kind of transition periods or waiting periods? Difficult to say. But the topic itself is very interesting. If somebody would like to get more information of it, you can even go into Wikipedia, or just type in Google in terms of course, Scottish independence, Scottish referendum, SNP, or whatever else you are interested in. Right, so shortly enough about the Scottish independence. Of course, as I say, the view presented here is my private one and not the one of any kind of employer I work for, therefore the Ministry of Defence, the General Command, or the military base itself. So this is my private opinion on Brexit, on the Scottish independence. Just one more before we go through to the level 1 and 2 comparison. Personally, if I had a Scottish nationality and I lived in Scotland, I was Scottish, the way I was brought up to my adult life, the same way as I was here in Poland, as being a patriot, or learning about the national history and things like that. If I was on the same side but living in Scotland and being Scottish, I would definitely personally vote for leaving the UK. But this is, as I say, my private opinion. Now, regarding the promise from last week about the differences between level 1 and 2 in Stanag exams in Poland. What's the difference? As you might remember from the first video, the level 1 is generally in favor of course, the person who is examined. So, first of all, you have the warm-up part, where you have to introduce yourself and spell your name. In the second part, you have a dialogue or a kind of role-playing dialogue between you and the examiner. But the questions to this dialogue, or hints to the dialogue, are written in Polish. And the third part is more or less speaking about your family, your hobbies, so an easy topic. On level 2, you have almost the same warm-up part, where you have to introduce yourself, you have to spell your name, and also you have to say some bits about your work, or where you work, or who you work for, or what you do. In the second part, where you have the role-playing game with your examiner. You have almost slightly more difficult topics. So, as I mentioned before, on level 1 you had to buy a ticket in a train station. On level 2, which I managed to look up, you have, for example, you are undergoing a job interview. So you are trying to apply for a job. The examiner is your future employer. So slightly more difficult, and the hints and the questions that are added to this part are written in English. So not in Polish, but in English. And the third part, you have to speak about a certain topic, but the topic is not as basic as your hobby, family, or your interests, or anything else on this level, but it's slightly more difficult. You have to, for example, on the one that regarding the job, there's a question, for example, do young people still apply for the summer jobs? And you have to present your point of view. So it's more of now presenting your point of view instead of speaking about yourself. So these are the differences between level 1 and level 2. Level 2 slightly more difficult, but still not on a very demanding level. Next week, when we meet, possibly on Tuesday, I will try to present my views on Brexit, pros and cons. We'll see how the situation goes, because this was one of the top news in Europe before the pandemic. And we will, of course, compare level 2 with level 3 speaking exam. So until then, have a nice week and have a nice weekend. As I say time and time again, use the English speaking medias. Don't translate the sites, don't watch movies with subtitles, listen to English speaking radios, read English magazines and books, and just listen to English whenever you can, whenever you have as per moment. So up until next week, as I say, have a good time and see ourselves on Tuesday. Bye!